Hello and welcome to episode number 48 of Chel Squared. I'm your host, Andrew Chel, and as per usual, we've got a ton to talk about today. If you've been following the show on Twitter, you already know this, but in case you don't, what are you doing? Go follow the show at Chel Squared. New episodes will now be released every Friday instead of Thursday. From here on out, I no longer have time on Thursdays to record, edit, and schedule the uploads. I stay up until 2 to 3 a.m. on Wednesday night to do so. The last couple of weeks that we've been recording the show, then getting up for work the next morning, and it clearly wasn't sustainable, nor a good idea for anybody involved. Friday is one of my days off from work, so this gives me much more flexibility to provide better hashtag content and more scorching takes. By the way, just mentioned the Twitter page, but I'll do it again as per my brand. Please follow the podcast on Twitter at Chel Squared and on Facebook at Chel Squared for more hot takes, news by featured guests, poll questions, and a whole lot more. If you want to follow my personal Twitter, it's at Chelney Andrew. Please rate the show if you enjoy listening. It means more to me that I can put into words. And as an incentive, I will give you a shout out on social media and on the podcast when you do so. Every time you either like the show on SoundCloud, give it a rating on Apple Podcasts, follow it on Spotify, etc. It makes me feel great. It helps the show out too. Unless Chipotle or the local sushi establishment wants to sponsor me, because I have given them more of my business over the years than I am willing to admit. I don't make any money off the podcast. This is done out of love in my spare time. So when I see a new rating or review or share or whatever else, I get this big goofy grin on my face that won't leave. So please do that if you haven't already. Also, Chel Squared is a part of National Podcast Network, a new network dedicated to NHL podcasts. Check the show out on there by going to nationalpodcast.network/Chel Squared. And though I am a SiriusXM employee, this podcast is not affiliated in any way with the company. The opinions expressed in this podcast are mine and mine alone and do not necessarily reflect the views of SiriusXM. If you're angry at my takes, direct them to me and me alone, please and thank you. A lot has happened since the last episode. The Boston Bruins have swept the Carolina Hurricanes and are now 4 wins away from winning the Stanley Cup. What went wrong for Carolina and what went right for Boston? We'll get into that during the show. Meanwhile, the Sharks are controversially up 2-1 in their series against the Blues, with Game 4 later tonight. We'll get into that mess and potential fixes for such an event in the future. Which of the two teams can and will pose the biggest threat to the Bruins? Is the city of Boston going to enjoy yet another championship? What the Bruins have done over the last couple of years to make this run work has been excellent. Nobody's arguing that. But man, the idea of Boston getting another parade, man, makes me sick to my stomach. And for that reason, and pretty much that reason alone, I'm rooting for either the Blues or the Sharks to hopefully get a parade of their own. Also, TSN today or last night put out a trade bait list that has some very interesting names on there, including a couple of Nashville names no one really expected to see a year or two ago. And we'll get into all that, the poll question, a whole lot more. Joining Chel Squared this week is co-host of the Ghost Goal podcast and the Brick House podcast, SiriusXM NFL AP, Andrew Passaro. Passaro, how are you? Welcome to the show.
It's good. It's glad to be here. It's been an interesting NHL playoffs, I will say. I'm a big Capitals fan, so the first round was pretty disappointing. Not as heartbreaking as years past, but disappointing nonetheless. But yeah, the conference finals have been pretty enjoyable, I will say, other than, as you mentioned, the controversy surrounding the Sharks win in Game 3 in that overtime game. But yeah, things are great, man. Happy to be here.
Obviously, the first round exit doesn't feel great, but hey, you have a ring, and you got to enjoy that ring last year. So while it hurts, it can't be that bad, right? It can't be. It could be worse.
It could be a lot worse, and I'll chalk up a couple untimely injuries that really derailed the Capitals that game. They took Carolina Game 7 and they played in overtime, double overtime in Game 7. But the injury to TJ Oshie earlier in the series hurt, and also the injury to Kempney, one of the defensemen. I think it was about 3 or 4 weeks before the playoffs. He went down in a pretty big battle with the Tampa Bay Lightning. That really hurt, and we just didn't have the depth like we did last year. And Carolina got a couple, played well. They played really well. They played physical with the Caps, and the Caps didn't kind of return that physicality. And this was a good Carolina team, a team that I certainly did not expect to give the Caps as much trouble, especially with the start that the Caps had. They took that 2-0 lead, and I thought the Caps could maybe handle it in 5. And obviously, I was very wrong on that one. But no, last year was great, and I think the most important thing was just to see Ovechkin getting a ring and getting a cup. He's one of the best scorers in the history of the game. Arguably he's in the conversation, I think, if he gets another ring or two to be up there in terms of top 10 best ever. But as a long-suffering DC sports fan, I can say this without a doubt. Top 5 athlete in DC history, easily the best player of my 25 years of watching, well, 23, whatever you want to count. I'm 25, you know what I mean. Best DC athlete by far. And also to see Nick Backstrom, who I think is arguably one of the most underrated players in the NHL, also get that honor. Last year was amazing. It was a great ride. I didn't get to go to any of the games because I just moved up to New York with Sirius, but I did go down to DC for one weekend and we caught I think game 3 outside of the arena on one of the scoreboards, and DC was going nuts like I'd never seen before. People were climbing trees. We were drinking beers literally in the street. It was amazing. And I would say, people have criticized DC in terms of being a bad sports town, but it's definitely got a big place in its heart for the Caps.
Where is Ovechkin on the list of best DC athletes in history? Because he's clearly top 5, probably clearly top 3. Also, as a complete aside, soccer or football, as people not in America call it, and get very angry when Americans call it soccer. You said 2-0 in the series against Carolina, and I caught that, and I was like, wow, this is you clearly host a soccer podcast, and
yeah, I do.
You are a soccer fanatic.
Definitely fanatic. I've been doing a podcast. So a little background. So I work with SiriusXM NFL Radio. I've been doing that for about the past 13 months. Previously, I've been with the company now about 4 years. I got my breakthrough with the company interning for the soccer channel in 2014. So as rising senior in college, I was covering the World Cup, and I was already like super into soccer, and that kind of pushed me from I really, really enjoy this and play what some would say an uncomfortable amount of FIFA and watching all the games to let's just say I finally convinced my parents that watching soccer was something I needed to do for work. So that was great. And I started a podcast just because I was enjoying it so much and wanted to kind of cover things a little bit differently, and found a buddy from high school who liked another team from the Premier League. I'm a Liverpool fan. My original co-host was a Chelsea fan. We've since added a third guy who's an Arsenal fan. And we talk about the games every week. But yeah, I've been covering soccer now. That podcast started in my parents' basement and has since grown into me hosting it from New York, and my co-host we all call in from DC, and we do that every week, do a couple episodes every week usually. But to go back to your original question, Ovechkin, I'd say probably number 2 in terms of top DC athletes, maybe 2 or 3. I think you got to go old school Redskins here. Like the Redskins, DC is still a Redskins town. Like the Caps won the cup, but if the Redskins had drafted Dwayne Haskins the next day, I'm not going to say that cup victory would have gotten forgotten. I'm saying that the one team that really brings the whole city together is the Redskins. It's just unfortunate the way that the direction the team has taken over the better part of the past 15 years has just been generally not great. I've only seen one season where they've gone back-to-back winning seasons, and they've never gone to the playoffs in back-to-back years. But Ovechkin has to be on the Mount Rushmore, and he's definitely not 4. He's at minimum 3. Maybe you're talking John Riggins. There's a couple other Redskins I can name, but I think, and you and I were chatting about this the other day. I think if Ovechkin makes another cup run, even if they lose in the finals, I think you're maybe talking about best DC athlete, because you're talking about a guy who perennially brought his team to the playoffs, a guy who, other than that one season under Dale Hunter, He's been like scoring 40 plus goals a season. And under that season with Dale Hunter, they played a more defensive style of hockey. He also moved Ovechkin onto the right wing, which I didn't think was ever really like I convinced myself at the time that was a good idea for him. It really wasn't. I mean, for gosh sakes, like every tweet, anytime you see something on hockey Twitter or hockey Reddit about, when they put up the this is what the ice is, like you have the Ovechkin spot. And I think that's going to kind of go into future people will always recognize that him on the power play on the left circle is always going to be, his hot spot. We've seen that one time so many times in the league, and teams know that they have to defend it and they still can't seem to defend it. But I the other thing too about Ovechkin is he's not as involved in the community as other players. I would say TJ Oshie's better about that, but he's a guy who's involved in the community, but he's a guy who DC fans know gives it his all every time he's on the ice and plays with a certain level of passion. Like every time he scores a goal, the guy's excited about it. And I can't as a guy who picked up hockey in high school, kind of when Ovechkin and Backstrom were really kind of starting to hit their stride. I think that's important. Like he plays with not like a level of arrogance, but a level of just pure excitement and passion for the game. And that sucks you in as a guy who,
Sure.
I never played hockey growing up, or if I did, it was like street hockey in gym class. I'm not good on the ice, very uncomfortable, but Ovechkin makes the game fun in a way that many DC athletes have failed. And I think that, there's no way another player is ever wearing, number 8 in red, white, and blue for the Caps. And I think you're going to see Ovechkin. It's funny. You're going to see a Russian name in DC for pretty much the rest of, any diehard DC sports fan that my Ovechkin jersey will be something I wear, frankly, till the day I die.
Russian name in DC. I mean, I'm not gonna get into it here, but Ovechkin, I feel like, isn't the only Russian name in DC, but sports wise, definitely the biggest name, at least for the foreseeable future. I don't think there's gonna be a bigger Russian name in the DC area until. I mean, who knows? Maybe the Caps can draft the next Ovi, and then in 60 years or whatever, that guy is going to be the big name. I don't know.
I mean, if Ovechkin cuts his career kind of short or something, which I don't see him doing, and Evgeny Kuznetsov becomes the guy and wins multiple, like 3-4 cups for the Caps, then we're going to have a different conversation. But I still think the guy is going to be Ovechkin, who kind of paved the way. I mean, Kuznetsov got drafted and then played like 3 or 4 years of KHL. And I remember having conversations with one of my best friends saying, dude, like when Kuzi comes, we're going to be fine. But, there's plenty of Russian talent that has not been convinced to come to the NHL. And I think Ovechkin has in this, post USSR era, Ovechkin has really kind of helped, I think, given NHL fans, like he's really helped bridge more and more talent coming over, at least the way that I look at it. I don't know if you would agree, but I think he's a huge name both in Russia and in the States. And there's very few other Russian hockey players who've had that kind of success. So even if another guy comes in for the Caps and has a ton of success, we're always going to look as Ovechkin as the first guy, which I think is always going to be special.
Oh, sure. I mean, Ovechkin being the trailblazer, if you will, of the bridge. Maybe not the first guy you would think of in terms of who's building the bridge, but at least in terms of the biggest name probably right now. Between the K and the NHL has to be Ovechkin, right? You think of the other names, you have obviously Vasi and Tarasenko and Kucherov and all those guys, but one of them has a cup, and the guys that I also mentioned do not have a cup. Ovi has one, and that is a huge deal, especially in the DC area, obviously, but in terms of the legacy and everything else that's attached to that ring, this is huge, and it also adds to the fact that, Don Cherry might not appreciate Alex Ovechkin because he's not Canadian, but for everybody else, this is huge. This is. I mean, I don't know the stat, but I don't remember the last time a Russian captain took a team to the final and won. I can't remember.
I can't either. And like when you talk about like Russians in the finals, a lot of people remember the old Russian five talking
Sure.
about the last time the Caps are the in the finals in the was at the '98 finals, and they got swept by the back-to-back champion Red Wings, who had five Russian guys. This is very early on in the closure of the USSR, and you're finally starting to get Russian talent in the NHL. And two of the guys get hit in a car accident celebrating the cup, and one of the guys is paralyzed for life. And it was one of the first instances or few instances where the captain of the Red Wings, was it Yzerman? I feel like it was Yzerman. Whoever it
Either
was,
Yzerman or Lidstrom. Maybe it was Lidstrom. I can't remember.
whoever it was, gave the cup to their teammate who had been paralyzed the year before. And it's one of the few instances where the cup wasn't almost immediately handed to an assistant captain or associate captain, whatever you want to call it, and handed to like a player who wasn't even on the team. But yeah, I mean, there isn't a history of Russian captains in the NHL, and actually a little peek behind the Capitals fan base here. There were a lot of Caps fans who were upset when Ovechkin was given the C and the timing of it. Like, a lot of people felt that he wasn't ready for it. And a lot of people also felt that the Capitals were doing it because Sidney Crosby had been named, captain in Pittsburgh, and because that had worked out. And it was, at the time, they were playing in the Winter Classic, coming up in the next year, I think. And it was more felt as like this is the Capitals trying to put Ovechkin on the same marketing level as Sidney Crosby. And there were guys on that team who were quote unquote better leaders and better for the locker room. And Ovechkin's okay at English, but he's certainly and he's done a good job to adjust to a more English speaking league, but he's definitely a better speaker in Russian. And there were a lot of questions about if he could ever get the big one done. And I'm just I just see the way that they celebrated last year. You could clearly tell how much it meant to Ovechkin. But like I said, there were people who questioned his capability of really getting it done and really being a capable leader in DC. And I think that, I think it's important that he has since proved them wrong. So.
No, you're absolutely right. And another captain that is definitely getting it done, he's not Russian, but he definitely is Canadian, is Patrice Bergeron for the Boston Bruins. I mean, this you take a look at the Boston Bruins, right? And they won the cup in 2011, and then they kept making the playoffs, and they just couldn't get it done. And then Chiarelli, with obviously the whole history behind that, and the turnover, and then Julian, and everything that's been happening with the Boston Bruins over the past 2 or so seasons, with Jimmy Vesey leaving, with Kevin Hayes leaving, obviously both Rangers legends here. But you have these names leaving, and you think, oh, what's the future of the Boston Bruins? Now they're in the Cup final again. This is a remarkable turnaround for a team that a year ago had a lot of questions coming into this season. Obviously, Bruce Cassidy, great coach behind the bench, but they did have maybe an earlier exit last year than perhaps they were slated to have. And that kind of sparked a little bit of uncertainty in the area. And now that's all out the window, because now they're 4 games away from winning the Cup again after sweeping the Hurricanes in the Eastern Conference Finals. Now, I'm just going to put that out there that the Hurricanes, they beat the Islanders, right? The Islanders swept the Penguins. The Hurricanes swept the Islanders. And now the Bruins swept the Hurricanes. So naturally, if the Bruins could get swept by either the Blues or the Sharks, that would be terrific for if only my ego. That would be great. I would love
You would
that.
hate to see that. You would really hate to see the Bruins. You'd hate to see the Bruins get swept in the Stanley Cup Finals. But I'll say this, and I'm not taking shots at the Bruins, because the reality is, and I say this all the time on Ghost Goal, actually, you can only play the team that's in front of you. It's not the Bruins' fault that they didn't have to match up against the Tampa Bay Lightning. It's not the Bruins' fault that they didn't have to match up against the Capitals. There were some pretty big dogs knocked out of the playoffs on both sides in this year's playoffs. It's been very unpredictable. A lot of the favorites didn't make it out of the first round. And you look at the Bruins coming out of the first round, and you say, wow, like this team is this team has the experience, this team has the juice, and also definitely I think there had to have been a huge sigh of relief for the Bruins to see the Lightning get knocked out in the way that they did, because all year the Lightning were, we were told this is going to be, this was the Golden State Warriors of a couple years ago, the team that lost, 9 games, broke the record from Jordan's Bulls, but they lost in the final. Tampa Bay not making it out of the first round is I don't know if choke job's the right word, but it's if it is, it's an all-time choke.
It's definitely a choke.
It's
definitely
an all-time choke job. Like maybe the worst in sports, because but credit to the Bruins, they've showed up, they've taken care of business. You can't criticize them for beating the teams that they've beaten. The question is now, are they going to be tuned up enough to beat whoever's coming out in the West? Because personally, I see whatever comes down, what this Blues and Sharks is going to come down to. I see 7 games. And frankly, I see 7 games in overtime. So I think both of those teams are very well matched up against each other. And how are the Bruins going to handle all this time off? I think, in some situations that's a cop-out. In other situations, I think in the NHL, you always want the extra time, because it always comes out a couple days after the Cup finals are over. How many guys, or our team gets eliminated, how many guys are going in for surgery, how many guys played with, a stress fracture in their foot or a screwed up ankle, and they're going to be out for a considerable amount of time. These guys are warriors in the postseason. So I'm not criticizing the Bruins. My question is, are they going to be on the same level of whoever that they're going to have to match up against in the West? That's my question. And good leadership and good experience. They have guys who are still a part of that Cup run, and the last time they won it, they will help get the younger guys ready for this. And I'd like to think that the Bruins have that leadership. Personally, I'm rooting against it. But
sure,
to tell me in 3 or 4 weeks now, hey, the Bruins won the Cup and Boston's having another parade in the last 6 months, it's hard not to bet on that. It really is.
As an aside, real quick, the culture of I saw a report of Calvin de Haan playing with a separated shoulder or something along those lines earlier today. And the caption was, the usual, oh, he's a warrior, he's this and that. I don't know if that notion is okay to push. And here's the thing, right? Calvin de Haan, obviously a great player, especially when he's healthy, and he is a benefit to his team and everything else that you could say about him. How much of a benefit are you to a team if you have a separated shoulder? Obviously, if a defenseman in the minors clearly is not going to be as good as Calvin de Haan. However, is that defenseman going to be as good as Calvin de Haan with a separated shoulder? And the at least in my mind, the answer is it's going to be close, because Calvin de Haan, or insert player name here, if you're playing in the Cup, if you're playing for the Cup, you're probably a good hockey player unless someone's injured and you're stepping in, and even then, your coach trusts you to play. The idea that Calvin de Haan or whoever it is has a separated shoulder or a broken leg or whatever it is, and they are still better than a replacement in the minors, it's a difficult question to answer, because you have all these, oh, he's a warrior, hockey players are warriors, this and that, but is it really helping the team? You can argue he's a locker room presence and this and that, he's fighting through it, but is it beneficial during game time to have someone with a separated shoulder play key minutes in an elimination game or a game 3 or whatever game that is you're playing in? How does the benefit of that player really outweigh the negatives in that situation? Does it really? Because this is something that I wanted to ask you about, because this is obviously a very tough question, because there's no one answer. But at the end of the day, I'm just not sure if Calvin de Haan with a separated shoulder playing in an elimination game 4 is better for the Hurricanes than for them to emergency call somebody up and have them play instead and have someone else like Brett Pesce or whoever it is fill at least some of those minutes.
I think it really is a situation by situation. There's no universal answer for that in my mind. I think certain and you could say that though, like that's not a hockey thing. That's a sports thing. That's a combination of the coach manager knowing his player, knowing what he can get out of them, and also knowing, okay, what's, if you're going to play with an injured guy, you have to know that there's a chance that 5 minutes into the game, he might not be good for the rest of the night. And that's a risk. That's a very tough question, a tough risk to take. And, in the NHL, obviously, you see guys getting on and off the ice very quickly. But at the same time, playing with 5 defensemen for 2.5 periods is in the playoffs. You don't want that smoke. Playing a forward down, especially if it's an important forward on a penalty kill or the power play, you don't want that. But I think this is a situation by situation thing where you can't really give a universal opinion on this. I think in the NHL you have just a history of guys who are some of the most competitive athletes in North America, guys who it's not just about the paycheck. It's about the pride of being out there, and I think that's what attracts a lot of hockey fans. There's a level of authenticity where we still feel like in some case these guys are athletes and not business people. Like these aren't guys who are worried about their brand or worried about how many Twitter followers they have or worried about maybe doing broadcasting. Like these are guys out there competing in a sport that they love, and who are you to tell them that like, hey, like this injury is not good. You're going to be a detriment to the team. Like, especially if you're calling up some kid who's never played in this type of situation.
Sure.
Like, I don't think there's a universal answer. I think it's a case by case thing. And I think what it comes down to is a good manager who knows his roster and knows when his guys are hurt, because we, as members of the media or fans of the game, are never going to know how bad it is. And I can guarantee you some of the injuries that these guys are playing with, you and I would never even think about lacing up the boots. We wouldn't even go to the gym that day. Like, these are different types of people. In the same way that you and I might go to the office sick because we care about what we do, that many other people would just call in and say, hey, boss, I'm not feeling great. I'm going to stay home today. So it's a mentality thing. And great NHL players have a different mentality.
That's a great answer. I mean, there's so many ways that you can attack this sort of question, right? Again, there's mentality and then there's recklessness. And that line between, okay, I can push myself to the brink here, and then being just incredibly reckless with your health and overall well-being, that line is very, very, very thin, especially in the postseason in any sport or in any game, really, for that matter. And it doesn't have to be the postseason. But players don't tend to play injured in the regular season, as far as I know. I mean, they might play with a minor tweak here and there, but no one's playing with a separated shoulder in game 46 of the regular season. No one's doing that, right? There's as far as I know, people don't do that. Maybe they do, but that, I feel like that's not a very smart thing to do for anybody involved, especially if you're a team that wants to make it to the postseason. If you are out here hemorrhaging your injuries in January, what are you going to do when May rolls around and you're still dealing with this injury? It's only going to get worse if you don't let it heal. So there's a lot of different ways to tackle this situation, but I feel like you have made some great points.
Yeah, I look, separated shoulders, a pretty brutal one.
Sure.
Like if you're asking my pure medical opinion, yeah, separated shoulder probably shouldn't be playing.
Yeah. But we're not doctors though. We just play we just play them on TV sometimes. But we are not medically trained doctors.
Usually, if I want medically trained doctors, I call my mom. So, but no, I don't think there's a clear cut answer here. But It is, but this is the difference, though. But like I said, between the NHL and everything else, go find me somebody in the NBA playoffs who's playing through adversity like this. Like, it doesn't exist. It just doesn't. And even, yeah, fine. Steph Curry's probably playing with a little bit of a knock on his ankle, but one, it's Steph Curry, which is exactly the argument I just made. And two, if it was a serious injury, the Warriors would have taken him out because they'd be worried about him for next year and their pursuits of everything. So
I'm gonna have to disagree a little bit there. With me working the NBA channel, Steph Curry is dealing with more than just the ankle. I think he's got a big finger problem.
Right. That's right.
I can't remember what exactly the problem is, that I don't want to speculate about it. But he is dealing with, to my knowledge, a pretty serious finger injury, which in the NBA is gigantic, because if you can't, hold the ball properly, or if shooting causes you a lot of problems, then you're not gonna do well on the floor. If your finger in hockey, let's say, isn't at 100%, I mean, it's not gonna be great, especially if it's your dominant shooting hand. But you could sort of at least somehow maybe muster a way to tape it to a finger and then or do something with it. In basketball, because it's such a limb heavy, finger heavy sport, if your finger or something is a little bit out of whack, if it's something even a little bit out of place, you're not going to shoot the ball well, and everything is not going to go your way. So there's that comparison. I will disagree with you a little bit there, but for everything else, it's just like, maybe football players play with dislocated shoulders or whatever. They do play. They play with concussions. That's for sure. That there's no argument there. They play with concussions and eventual CTE. And there are concussions and CTE in NHL too. I'm gonna at you, Gary Bettman. Please, can we figure it out? Concussions cause CTE. Can we figure it out, Gary Bettman? Please. I don't. Anyway, that's a whole different discussion for a whole different day. But yeah, I don't. You can play with injuries for until a certain point, but if it's this serious, maybe maybe don't do that. But again, we're not in that situation, so who are we to say something about it?
No, I totally agree. And yes, I mean, the NHL, NBA, everybody needs to do a better job with concussions. Honestly, the leagues that I'm seeing that are doing the best with it are actually soccer leagues, which is for a sport that has been very unwilling to change a lot of things for a game that's been played the same way for so long. They are doing a very good job with that. So that's really all I got on that one.
No, you're right. And also, going back to the Bruins here really quickly, the Bruins, I feel like, don't get enough credit for the season that they had, because they are tied for second best in the league. Right?
Yeah, they were a machine.
They were the second best team in the Eastern Conference, and they were tied with Calgary with 107 points here. The only reason why this isn't a bigger story is because the Lightning won 62 games with 128 points. And they destroyed everybody in the regular season. They only get wrecked by the Blue Jackets in 4 games. But the Boston Bruins have won 49 games in the regular season this year. Tied with Calgary, 107 points. They were super great for the majority of the season, and I feel like people aren't talking about it. It kind of just feels like maybe they just aren't getting enough credit, or I don't know what's going on. But the Bruins are definitely a favorite, and the only reason why they weren't a favorite day one is because of the Lightning. But as soon as they were knocked out, I feel like more people should have put money on the Bruins, because, I mean, hey, tied for second best in the league. This isn't, these aren't the Hurricanes, who played very well down the stretch and then made it by a couple of points. The Bruins were a dominant team for pretty much the entire season.
And also, too, like, they were a really, really good team. They were a wagon. They were taking teams down left and right. But like I said, I think, too, you have to think that the Bruins, the second that they saw the Lightning get eliminated, say, we've got a really good chance this year. They really turned it on. I mean, the Lightning get swept at the time. Fine, you still have Boston battling Toronto. You had Carolina and Washington going at it, and the Islanders were in the it had just also swept Pittsburgh. So you're telling me you've got an Islanders team that is young and inexperienced and lost their best player last year. Very well managed team.
Sure.
Fine, you got the reigning Cup champion still in at that time with the Caps, but you've got Carolina that's playing it's a gritty style of hockey a little bit, and then you've got Columbus, and it's like, okay, we're, at best, the Caps are probably the best team here, but we could go toe to toe with the Caps in the playoffs. They've done it before. The Caps did have the Bruins number a lot in the regular season. I think they took most of those games, but the second that the Caps get eliminated, the Bruins are looking around. It's like, okay, no, the other big teams don't want to play. Okay, cool, we got this. Like, there wasn't, like I said, like if you had told me after the end of the first round that the Bruins are going to the Cup Finals, I'd be like, that's the logical choice. Because they are good, not because no everyone else was bad, because they were significantly better than all of those other teams, and all of those other teams don't have playoff experience. The Bruins have been a top team, and they have the pieces, and also they have, I'm surprised we haven't brought it up beforehand, but they have the right type of guys to get under another team's skin. Like, but they have a team that scores well, a team that moves the puck well, and a team that plays decent defense, and a good goalie. Like, all of those are the pieces that you need to win a Stanley Cup, and against teams that, in my opinion, either didn't have the experience or didn't have those pieces. This is just the way it is.
Tuukka Rask, man, in those 4 games against the Hurricanes, I just feel like if you couldn't score on him if he was blindfolded and turned around 8 different ways. I mean, he was an absolute monster in between the pipes. Throughout the playoffs, but especially in the last 4 games, he's been an absolute just. Try to score on Tuukka Rask, you won't be able to. There's about a 0% chance, well, a 0.5% chance or whatever that you're going to score on him. He was reason number 1 they swept the Hurricanes, bar none.
Where does he rank for you in terms of like top keepers in the league?
See, again, you said keepers and not goaltenders,
yeah.
So there's your soccer fanaticism.
Yeah. One of my best friends will probably listen to this and be like, I can't believe you went onto a hockey podcast and used all soccer terminology. And at this point, I'm just going to keep doing it just to piss him off, but it's fine. Where in tops of best goalies, where is he?
He's got to be top 5. He's got to be.
Yeah.
He's got to be. I mean, maybe this might be recency bias, and I don't have his whole regular season. I don't have the stat line for every goaltender in the NHL in front of me. But the idea that Tuukka Rask at bare minimum isn't a top 5 goalie. First of all, if you're arguing, if someone's arguing that, I feel like you shouldn't listen to them about hockey. I mean, have you watched Tuukka Rask play? There's the idea behind Tuukka Rask hate is that, he gives up soft goals and this and that. First of all, find me a goaltender that doesn't once in a while give up a bad goal. Every goaltender in the history of ever has given up bad goals, right? There's no goaltender. Hasek gave up bad goals occasionally. Belfour gave up bad goals. You're gonna have those moments where they're just gonna be goals where you're gonna want to have them back. That's never gonna change in the history of at least hockey, where a goaltender gives up a softie and says, okay, I really should get it together here because that was a bad goal to give up. That's going to happen to anybody between the pipes in the history of the universe. That's just going to happen. But besides that, and that really hasn't happened in this postseason, especially in the last couple of rounds, the Haan goal in Game 3, little bit of a softie, fine. But every other moment in that series, he was unstoppable. He was unbeatable almost. The saves that he was making was incredible. His positioning was incredible. The way he was pushing off to make those cross-crease saves was fantastic. He was on top of his game. He was as sharp as he could be against Carolina, and he made Carolina look bad. He made them look bad because they had a lot of great opportunities to score, And Tuukka Rask said that's not going to happen, and he just destroyed any hope they had. And he did it super early in the game. He did it in the middle of a game, and he did it at the end of the game to just completely ruin the Hurricanes' confidence. And he was a monster. There's no argument to, at least in my mind, that would suggest that if he were to at least maintain some sort of this play throughout the final and then afterwards, that he's going to be a top 3 goaltender. And in some cases, he already is. I mean, name me at least a couple of other goaltenders that were better than him this season. You could say Ben Bishop was phenomenal this season. Probably should win the Vezina this season. I would hope he gets the Vezina. Probably going to go to Vasilevsky because of the name and because of the amount of wins. But Ben Bishop played it completely out of his mind in the regular season, and in my mind deserves to win that trophy. But Tuukka Rask has to be up there. I mean, he played sensationally down the stretch in the playoffs, and now he has shown why the Bruins trust him so much and why the people that hate him should maybe shut up about him.
No, I would totally agree. I think he's probably top 3.
Sure.
I think I would probably maybe peg him at 3, but I also too, like, you see this in hockey in particular, when a goalie gets hot, it's kind of over. Like, it's like, and I don't question whether or not Rask can continue this hot streak into the Cup Finals. I really think he can. Personally, hoping against it, but
sure.
Nah, Tuukka Rask is everything that I would have said, you already said.
This brings me into my poll question for this week, and I'm going to read you the 4 choices, but I'm not going to tell you which of the 4 is in the lead until after I hear what you have to say about it. So on a scale of 1 to 10, but also, by the way, if you want to vote in the poll or if you want to tweet at the poll, at Chel squared on Twitter, I do recommend you follow the page, or my page at Chel and Andrew for that matter, or at Andrew Passaro on Twitter. You should do that as well. Give everybody a follow. Why not?
So big on the Instagram too, if we want to plug things. Big on the Instagram.
And on the Instagram. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how much have you been enjoying the 2019 Stanley Cup playoffs compared to other years? And the 4 choices were 1 to 3, not at all. 4 to 6 has its moments. 7 to 9, loving it. Or 10, best playoffs ever. Which of the 4 did you choose, or would you choose?
I did vote, actually, and I went with the second. I'm enjoying it. It's had its moments. I will say, as great as the Columbus Blue Jackets sweeping the Lightning was, I felt as a hockey fan kind of robbed of not seeing the Bruins and the Lightning clash in that second round. And I'll say this too, as a Capitals fan who wanted to go to Brooklyn to watch the Islanders play the Capitals and watch the Capitals play up against the coach that led them to a Stanley Cup, I felt robbed of that too. Not that the underdog story wasn't great. I just felt like we kind of, and also too, and I know we're probably going to talk about this, but the Sharks getting past Vegas in the way that they did with the call that they made, that was really disappointing. Some of the calls that have already been made in the Blues-Sharks series, some of the calls that were made, there's been some questionable moments, which is why I can't say best playoffs ever. And with my team getting knocked out in some potentially what could have been all-time classic playoff battles not happening, it's been a good playoffs. It hasn't been bad, but it certainly, in my mind, could have been better.
That's fair. And one response that I want to read really quickly that pretty much agrees with you. Right before I mentioned the winner of the poll is from @Bennett_CK, and he said, first round was incredible. Second round, very good. Now those upsets took their toll in the East, at least. Boston, Carolina was meh, and I'm anticipating the final to follow suit, 4 to 6 overall. And there's a tie. There's no winner in the poll. There's a 2-way tie between 4 and 6 and 7 to 9. Both are at 38% of the poll. And the other 2 choices, 1 to 3 and 10, are also tied at 12%. So I feel like Boston fans are choosing the 10, obviously. And then everybody else is somewhere in between for the most part. Unless, of course, you're a Lightning fan, in which case you're choosing 1 to 3. But I feel like that's a fair statement to make. This is probably not the most incredible playoff series. I mean, I feel like it might have been last year, 2 years ago, I can't remember, but the year that pretty much every game went to overtime, that was so much fun for me. I think it might have been last year. I'm a Rangers fan, so they didn't make the playoffs last year either, and so watching those overtimes to me was incredible. And I feel like if you're not a fan of the two teams that are playing overtime, you also I super enjoyed those games because it was intense. You can't beat playoff overtime hockey. You can't beat it. In any sport, any situation, playoff overtime hockey is the most incredible, fast-paced action that you're going to get in sports.
You get it every year. Because I would say there's only one thing better in sports for me, and that's a World Cup final that goes to overtime. But you're right. We get overtime hockey all the time, like every year. But there is nothing better than it. It's why the month of the middle of April all the way till the end of May, in my opinion, as a sports fan, is the best time because baseball is in a full effect. NBA, NHL playoffs. You got the horse races. You've got soccer coming down to the wire. There's literally no better time.
Horses, though, with their way of a questionable call, they're fighting. They're teaming up with the NHL refs. I feel like.
Oh, they definitely are.
They're in cahoots with the NHL refs in terms of questionable calls because the Sharks. This is now their second super controversial call. This one a lot bigger than the Vegas call, in my mind at least, because the Vegas call was wrong, right? I talked about this in previous shows. The Vegas call was wrong, and it should have been 2 minutes. But I can understand from a referee perspective why they gave him 5, why they gave Cody Eakin 5, because they saw blood and they saw Couture or Pavelski, I can't remember which player it was. He was down, he wasn't moving, right? And you saw blood coming out of his helmet, and you thought, okay, this is going to be bad. I don't agree with the call at all.
Cody Eakin did nothing wrong. Justice for Cody Eakin.
Right. Justice for Cody. # justice for Cody. There's at least a sliver of understanding behind why the referee made the decision that he made, right? You might not agree and it was a wrong call and all that, but at least you can sort of understand the reasoning behind the call. Sure, give him that. Game 3, overtime, hand pass.
Blatant hand pass.
And not only was it not called, Timo Meier got an assist for it. He got an assist for the hand pass.
Makes no sense. What a hack job by the NHL. I mean, every playoffs, we see one questionable call, whether it's a guy who hits someone too hard and gets suspended first, what some fans think is too long, what others fans think is not enough. I mean, I remember a couple years ago when the Caps and the Pens were playing and Ovechkin lit up Crosby, and one writer for the Penguins wanted Ovechkin suspended for the rest of the playoffs. The NHL playoffs is one of the most every year, and I love hockey, and it's not going to make me stop, but every year there's one controversial call. But the fact that the Sharks have now had 2, the fact that they had a call that the refs, quote, it's not an overturnable call. What are you talking about? Like, why can you not review that it was clearly a hand pass? That's like, I haven't heard as bad of a botched call in sports since the NFC Championship game with the Saints.
Right.
And at least that's reviewable now. Like, this isn't like an all-time moment for the NHL and a league that is struggling to keep up with some of the other professional sports leagues in the NFL compared to the NFL and the NBA and the way that they're going. They're being talked about for all the wrong reasons right now. You basically just, like, I'm not going to say NHL fans want a mulligan given to the Blues, but you can't let this kind of you can't let this kind of mistake come up in an overtime game in the Western Conference Finals. Like, we're not at that point anymore. Something like this happens, like you mentioned, game 42 in the middle of the season. Fine, you move on from it. There's bad calls, but we're in the time where these refs have to be making the best calls. And frankly, I'm just kind of sick of not seeing great refereeing. And this, look, I'm not going to look at the Sharks here and criticize them for this. That was a bad call by the referee. Blame needs to be given to the appropriate place.
The NHL needs to figure this out, right? Because if you can give an offside, if you can review an offside that was nanoseconds, not nanoseconds, like nanometers from the line, right? If you can review that, you can review a hand pass. And I get it, it's on the rule book, but it should be. At the very least, make it a coach's challenge, right? Make a coach's challenge so that you could challenge that. Because this is a disgrace to the sport. You are ruining the sanctity of the sport. This is what reviews are for. This is what reviews are meant to be for. You review a goal if it crossed the goal line. You could review a goal to see if it was legal or not. I don't see why this has to be more difficult than it is. I just don't see why there's no rule in place. If there was a blatant hand pass, and you can't change that because it's not a reviewable play, this goes against the sanctity of the sport. You can't score goals like that ever. You especially can't score a goal like that in Game 3 of the Western Conference Final to win the game. You can't do that. It's a joke, and if the NHL doesn't get it fixed, the second after the finals are over, I mean, are they really trying to fix the game at that point? If they clearly they watch what happened. Clearly they did, and they know what happened. If they don't, in these meetings during the summer, get this together and figure it out, there's going to be a bigger problem than what we saw on the ice in Game 3.
Oh, I totally agree. I picked the Blues to win this series. I have a couple shekels on them someplace, allegedly.
Rumor has it that my sources tell me.
Sources tell me that I may have decided to do that, but and my reasons for wanting the Blues to go through, I could have very easily picked the Sharks, but neither of these teams have won a Stanley Cup. The Blues have never even played in a Stanley Cup. After watching the Caps win their first last year, I was like, I want the feel-good story. And I've seen a lot of passionate Blues fans on Twitter, and I'm all for it. And also TJ Oshie, former Blue. So, I'm all there for it. But the league has to get this right, man. Like, this is the type of stuff that makes you potentially lose fans. And the NHL is not in a situation where it can afford to lose viewership.
Right.
Like, it's not rocket science. It really isn't. But where do we go from here? Like, are these guys going to get suspended? Are they going to change the referee crew? Like, certainly these guys can't be coaching. It can't be refereeing, coaching. Definitely not coaching. These guys cannot be refereeing in the Cup Finals. They absolutely cannot. If they're making mistakes like this in the Western Conference Finals, and then they're refereeing at the next level, like that's a real problem.
Do they have refs left? Because the refs that see, now I said coach too because you said it.
Yeah, that's my bad.
The refs that work the Game 7 game, they didn't ref since that game, and you keep cutting the number of refs that are working the games. Eventually, you're not going to find any left, unless of course you want to go the replacement ref strategy, and then have just complete chaos, complete chaos. But really quickly here. The Sharks and the Blues, in terms of how they go up against the Bruins here, they both have their strengths and they both have their weaknesses. I do still have questions about Martin Jones. He's played very well in the second round. He played very well in the third round. He played very well after going down 3-1 in the series against Vegas. But I'm just not sold until Martin Jones proves to me that if he carries this team to a cup final win. If the Sharks win the cup this season with Martin Jones, then I'll change my mind about Martin Jones as the goaltender. As of now, I'm still on the fence about Martin Jones being able to carry his team to the promised land of a cup win. I'm still doubting him until he proves to me that he can do it. For the Blues, the question remains of can Binghamton continue his play? Because he's been playing very well for the most part anyway. There has been a couple of moments here and there. The game tying goal in game 3 kind of trickled by him. And the Sharks stuffed it in. Wasn't a great moment, but again, there was chaos in front of the net. So it wasn't the best goal, it wasn't the worst goal. It was kind of one of those goals where you really need your goaltender to have, and the puck just kind of trickled out, and it found its way in the back of the net. Not a great moment for Binghamton, but you really can't blame him for the overtime winner because of that disgustingly bad hand pass. But both teams, what do they have? They have great offenses. They have great defenses for the most part. I would give St. Louis the edge on the blue line. But in terms of overall play, both teams play a very solid style of hockey. The question is, can this goaltending stop the Boston Bruins? And the answer to that question is, well, I don't know. I don't know.
I would agree with that. I really like Boston's odds against either one of these teams. I think the only way that whichever team's coming out of the West needs to try to win one of those first, because those first 2 games are going to be in Boston, correct? Regardless.
Yeah.
You got to take one in Boston. If you go down 2-0 in Boston and give them all of that, like just the juice, then I don't know if this series lasts longer than 5 again. I think on paper you would still say that Boston is probably the favorite, no matter who goes through. But I don't know. Maybe the Bruins or maybe the Blues somehow whip 3 straight rip 3 straight wins off here and use the penalty as kind of the motivation and get hot. Maybe the Sharks can close it out in 2 more games. And again, I think it's all about hot and cold. But I just see this. I see this Western Conference Finals going to 7. I really do. I think these 2 teams just match up well against each other. And I think you'll see the Blues win game 4, Sharks win game 5, the Blues win game 6, and then game 7 comes right down to it. Maybe the Blues, if they can get the power play going, maybe they can make this a quicker series, but I don't know, man. I really don't. I don't like either of their 2 opportunities against a very loud fan base in Boston. I really don't.
It's tough. It's going to be very, very tough. And really quickly, before I let you go, one last thing. I want to touch upon the TSN trade bait story that came out earlier today. That has some pretty interesting names on there. There's 15 names in total. A couple of names that if you said this a year or 2 ago, people would look at you like you have 4 heads. But a couple of names on here include PK Subban and Kyle Turris, both, of course, from the Nashville Predators. PK Subban didn't have a great year this year, and neither did Kyle Turris. I mean, PK Subban still has 3 years left on his deal after this season at $9 million. He only scored 9 goals, 31 points in 63 games this season. And Kyle Turris has 5 years left at $6 million, 23 points, only 7 goals in 55 games this season. A far cry from the offensively dynamic seasons he's had in Nashville, but this season he hasn't looked good. Only 7 goals, as I just mentioned. There's a couple of other names on here. Jacob Trouba, one of maybe the best defenseman Winnipeg has to offer. He's going to be an RFA at the end of this season. 50 points in 82 games this season. He almost didn't play this season, or was it last year? I can't remember, because of a contract dispute. And he got a very short-term deal, and it looks like Jacob Trouba is going to be on his way out of Winnipeg. He's played his last game as a Jet, and it looks to me as if this series, this friendship is over between Trouba and Winnipeg. There's a lot of names that, I mean, the number one name obviously is Phil Kessel, who has 3 years left, $6.8 million on his deal. This isn't surprising at all. This has been mentioned and rumored for a while. And obviously, he's not quote unquote officially on Pittsburgh's trade block. The idea is that while it's not written in stone, it's pretty much been talked about for the last few months now that Phil Kessel is probably on his way out of Pittsburgh, which if you look at his numbers, right, off the very base level numbers, he has 82 points in 82 games, right? But he went through a lot of stretches in the regular season where he just couldn't score. He wasn't scoring goals. He wasn't playing his best hockey, and eventually now it's coming down to the idea that he's gone. He's going to be traded from Pittsburgh, and that's going to be the end of that. There's a lot of names on here that are interesting, and this offseason is going to be a very, just for a hockey fan in general, this is going to be super, super interesting to see where these players go, if anywhere. They might stay. Who knows?
Well, I think Phil Kessel's like you can probably lock him in for leaving. I think part of the article also talked about like his guy in the Pittsburgh like coaching staff is no longer there. He's out coaching the Coyotes. There's talks of tension between Kessel and the rest of his line mates. I think Pittsburgh is going to kind of try to change things up here. Obviously, Sid and Evgeny Malkin are going nowhere, but we've seen Pittsburgh move their surrounding pieces a lot in their tenure in the Sidney Crosby era. Subban would shock me, honestly. I know he's got a brother playing in the league. We know he's a very popular NHL player, but it was only recently when we really saw Nashville kind of come alive as a really dominant franchise. Obviously, they haven't won a cup yet, but PK Subban has always been that guy that when I say, oh, the Preds are on, it was PK Subban you were talking about. It would just kind of surprise me to see the team move on from a piece like that who not, and I hate to look at sports like this, but you have to sometimes. A guy who's been marketed so well and a guy that so many casual sports fans know, oh, PK Subban plays in Nashville. To move him, would have to be for the right piece. Either they're blowing it up and they're starting over, or you have to bring in another guy with some kind of star power, in my mind. And I don't know if that guy's out there this year.
And I would agree. I don't see a really good trade for Nashville if they want to get rid of Subban. The only thing that I'm coming up with here is if Jacob Trouba, just by looking at this list alone, not even thinking of other possible situations, if just by looking at only this TSN trade bait board, if Jacob Trouba agreed to a long-term deal in Nashville, this could potentially be a starting point for a discussion between Dave Poile and Kevin Cheveldayoff. But that has to be, that would, be a huge blockbuster if it happens. And two, there's obviously going to be more in this trade than just Subban and just Trouba, unless, of course, Bergevin gets fired in Montreal and then seemingly gets hired in either Nashville or Winnipeg, in which case it'll be a 1-for-1 deal. Or he's going to make a terrible move like he did with trading Subban away for Weber, which not looking good. It's not looking good. That's not a trade that has aged well. It didn't age well when it happened. It hasn't aged well on May 17th, 2019. But that, just by a surface level, looking at some of the names on this list, and you think, if Trouba said yes to a long-term deal in Nashville, Winnipeg is looking to probably move him. If judging by this trade bait board, Nashville might be considering getting rid of Subban. That could potentially be a move where both teams benefit, but it will be a major blockbuster and a major shakeup to the Western Conference.
Oh yeah. Like those are big moves, like big time moves.
There's obviously other names on here like Shattenkirk, who has been rumored to be on the trade bait board since the minute he signed that contract, pretty much. And he hasn't been bad, but he's also been injured for a lot of the time. Played the whole first year pretty much injured thanks to Alain Vigneault. Still not a fan of that man by any stretch of the imagination, and I can't believe Philadelphia signed him. But anyway,
Can you?
they
I
have
can believe
3
that.
coaches, 3 head coaches behind their bench now, and it's gonna be a cluster. I don't know what they're gonna do. I don't.
I don't know. I'm enjoying the chaos. I went to college with a lot of Philadelphia Flyers fans, and seeing them not be successful generally like warms my heart because Flyers fans can be the worst.
Yeah, so can Boston fans. And
yes, no. Boston fans are significantly worse,
they're in the final again. So
yeah,
hopefully,
I know.
In the case of Boston, who has waited so many weeks for a championship drought to end, so many seconds, so many minutes here for their championship drought to end. I don't know how many minutes are in 4 months, 3 months, but it's not a big number. It's not a huge number here. So I don't want to say Boston win only because of their success constantly with the Patriots and the Red Sox and the Celtics in 08 and all of that great stuff. I mean, and the Bruins in 11 also, and they almost did it again in 13 if they didn't blow it in 17 seconds to the Chicago Blackhawks. But for that reason alone, I don't. Boston doesn't need another championship. You know who needs a parade? St. Louis. You know who needs a parade? San Jose. You know who doesn't need a parade? Boston.
Nope. Not at all. Don't want to see it. Really, really don't.
No. No, you don't. Andrew, this has been an absolutely incredible conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time. Plug your social media. Plug your I don't know how you do 2 podcasts. I really don't. Cause doing one with a full-time job is nearly impossible. You do 2, and I can't imagine how difficult that is.
Well, it helps. I have a team. So,
Right.
Well, first of all, at Andrew Passaro, Twitter and Instagram. So if you're a soccer fan, I've been doing Ghost Goal for 3. We just finished covering our 3rd season of the English Premier League. And I have 2 other guys, and I usually only take editing duties 1 night a week. So that's not bad. We in the season we'll have a Tuesday episode where we'll recap the weekend, and then we'll usually have a Thursday episode where we're previewing the upcoming weekend. And I only do one of those 2 usually. So that helps. Usually episodes are about 30 minutes long. We'll have content all summer long following the transfer window. We're going to do a big Champions League and Europa League final preview coming up over the next week or so. So if you're a soccer fan, like I said, go follow us at Ghost Goal Pod. So the other project, Brickhouse, and by the way, that's spelled Brikhouse. I did a music show, and I did a music and sports show, 2 different shows in college. And my best friend was still living in our college town, but moved back to New York late last summer. And he and I have been trying to do content in some form. And really the only way it was able to happen was once he moved back to New York. So we label ourselves as a music podcast, and we're the music podcast for music you're not listening to that you should be listening to. What I would say is we're 2 guys who listen to a lot of music that's all over the board, from hip hop to classic rock to current punk to old punk. The only thing we're really not listening to is country.
Fair.
And even still, we talked about Old Town Road.
Of course. An instant classic.
So that podcast probably comes out. We had like a month off just because of travel, which was unplanned, but again, episodes are about 25 to 35 minutes in length. We talk about music. We put out a Spotify playlist with every podcast that we come out with all the music we talked about. But like, for example, on our last episode, we kind of talked about some of the big themes from Game of Thrones this year, and we talked about a couple other topics, and then we did I live in Brooklyn and my co-host lives in Queens. So we did the top 5 rappers from Brooklyn versus the top 5 rappers from Queens. Follow us on Instagram at BrickHousePod. There's no C in that. So BRIKHOUSE. And yeah, we talk about music. We have a hotline. So we've had people call in and ask questions about stuff and we've done some interviews. We've interviewed an up and coming rapper. We're going to interview somebody who's got a film coming to the Italian American Film Festival and a couple other festivals. We've got that coming up at the end of the month. So honestly, it's just the 2 of us kind of goofing off and having a good time and trying to talk to people about good music and other content and other interesting things in the content world. And all of this is us having fun and fooling around and trying to make people laugh. And so it's got, I'm not going to say that Brickhouse is like the most like PC or clean, or definitely don't listen to it with children in the car, but trust me, we have an incredible passion for music, and we hear something or we think about something and it's like, hey, we should talk about this on the podcast. Literally once, twice a week, we'll be like, oh, we see something on Instagram, we want to talk about it. So Brickhouse is just kind of like an opportunity for me to like goof off and kind of talk about more pop culture and music stuff than just the sports stuff, because I consume all of it. I'll be watching sports with music on in the background. Like, it's just who I am. So yeah, I got a lot to talk about. It is a lot to manage, but I kind of break things up in a way where it really isn't too much on my plate.
Speaking of music, well, what have you been listening to recently? It could be music, could be a podcast, what could be anything. What has captured your attention recently that you like to share?
I listen to Pardon My Take every Monday, Wednesday, Friday when that comes out. I'm a big AWL, as fans of Pardon My Take would say. But then other than that, music-wise, I'm really all over the map. I was listening to, like, the other night, I closed my radio show with Tuesdays Gone by Leonard Skinner, and then went home and listened to Leonard Skinner for like the next hour. But I'm listening to a lot of hip-hop these days, a lot of 2 Chainz. I started listening to the new Tyler, the Creator album, which dropped today. I'm going to go give that a full listen later this afternoon. Was listening to a bunch of Mac Miller earlier this week. Mm-hmm. Weather really dictates a lot of things for me, which is like kind of weird to say, but if I'm out with my friends, like hanging out on a Saturday afternoon, the style of music, the mood really fits the style of music. I'm usually not like I want to listen to this. It's kind of like if I'm in like a upbeat, happy mood, I'm going to listen to something like the Caps lost in the playoffs and it was Jimi Hendrix blues music. Like I'm really all over the place, and I can go from literally listening to like hardcore gangster rap to like 90s alternative to like 60s like hippie music in a very quick transition. But the one thing I will tell you, if you decide to tune into Brickhouse, is we will definitely give you music that you've never heard of before, and I guarantee you'll find something that you like. Joe, my co-host, the amount of time, like I'm probably 50-50 in terms of like pop culture and sports. Joe is 100% just listening to music. Like it took him until this year to get into Game of Thrones. There's been a lot of things that I'm kind of like, hey, you need to watch this movie. Hey, you need to watch this TV show. And I have to drag him there. But the one thing that he's always dragged me to is like, hey, there's this artist you should listen to, or this band you should listen to. He is one of the best at that. And so sometimes in the pod, it's really just kind of letting him shine. And sometimes it's me just talking about the hilarious moments that happen in my life. And as the regular host of this podcast can tell you, I always have a story.
Awesome, man. Really appreciate you coming on. I'll see you at work.
Yes.
And yeah, dude, again, super appreciate you coming on.
No problem, man. Anytime.
And this has been episode number 48 of Chel Squared. Number 49 coming out next week, next Friday, not next Thursday. Next Friday, all episodes from here on out will be coming out on Friday. I'll talk to you then.